Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business podcast. I am your co-host, JP John Polish from the Two Man Power Trip. And of course, joining me is the star of this show, my co-host, the wizard himself, Mr. Trump Mania, Mr. Lavie Margolin. Lavie, how you doing today, sir?
Hey John, you're far too kind. If anything, I'm a co-host or maybe a little bit less. I know with like Kevin Sullivan or Tom Pritchard, they certainly get the spotlight. But appreciate collaborating with you for 141 episodes, if my counting is correct.
Yes, it's pretty good. 141. And obviously, we got a lot to talk about today. But SE Scoops, of course, the official business podcast of the show. We're, of course, distributed by the Creative Control Network. And I know you loved our LinkedIn group as well.
Yes, continuing to grow. So find us on LinkedIn. Pretty sure we're the only wrestling business LinkedIn group. I think there was like an attempt at like a wrestling jobs website, which would have been cool. So they might have a LinkedIn group. I'm not sure of the status of that, but I think we're pretty distinct in that world.
As far as the business is concerned, I know books always come up and wrestling books always come up. Todd is God, the new Todd Gordon book. Obviously, Tim Hornbaker's new book about the last real world champion, Ric Flair. Tell us a little bit about some books in the wrestling world.
Yes. Sorry, I just clicked on on a YouTube video by mistake. Yeah, I've been reading, and the most recent books that I finished, of course, Todd is God, Todd Gordon. Um, I never really understood sort of like too much about the G part, right? Like the original G, Heyman Gordon. So Todd really goes into the business aspects, certainly from his perspective, how things unfolded and how the relationship with Heyman developed, um, how he was sort of called the mole, and how he was sort of involved in that, but how it kind of changed the perception of him in the company. So that was like fascinating, especially talking about like the business of the business industry. The part that reads a little bit differently in today's world is sort of like the dude bro stuff, for lack of a better word. Like if you've ever watched like some of those like ECW type shoot interviews where it's sort of the fun or the dangerous activities that they were having in the that dumpy motel that everyone talks about. Some of it just doesn't read too well in today's world, and it's a little bit sad too how Gordon had and I think still has a successful business, but sort of how getting involved in the business seemingly had hurt his family life. But not to reveal, but he comes back around again, and there's a cute picture in the book of him with his grandson, and he looks like the happiest guy in the world. So don't want to give too much away of that, but I'd recommend it. There's some parts, not that I'm like, right to censor or whatever, but like there's some parts that was like maybe a little bit uncomfortable to read, like, but you're looking at the wrestling business, so always interesting there. But a word of caution, but for the business side, that really was fascinating. I want to say similarly, but only some similarities with, of course, Tim Hornbaker's forthcoming book from ECW Press, Ric Flair, The Last Real World Champion. Of course, so thoroughly researched, and pretty much everyone knows Ric Flair's story for the last 50 years. But the book starts even earlier, and really, some people say he was adopted or he was a baby that was kidnapped or whatever. Like, it never exactly made sense to me. So it actually, Hornbaker makes it clear sort of like what happened in terms of Flair's adoption process, has the facts there. That's the interesting part, sort of going into newspaper archives and supplementing the information that we have. At times it could feel like a little bit heavy, going through, like, at some points, like when he's defending the belt worldwide, it's like speeding through. At other points, it's sort of like feels like week to week of like Jim Crockett or WTBS programming. And one part that moves through very quickly is sort of like the plane ride from hell and the accusations that Flair has undergone. both for that, in terms of interpersonal interactions with women, but also financially. Of course, it talks about his financial struggles and borrowing money, but some things that are moved through pretty quickly there as well. A little bit, as Tim was kind enough to note in Twitter, some of that's in the footnotes, but that's not really the book. I think if that's something that's important to cover, I think it should be in the book. I'm somebody that likes to nerd out and read the footnotes, but I'd certainly recommend both books for people that enjoy pro wrestling books. It's been a good summer. I have Steve Kern's book now, so I'm a little bit late to the party, but I'm enjoying that as well.
What about Darkside of the Ring? I Bash at the Beach 2000 and Bam Bigelow episodes were pretty good.
Yeah, I think this is, to me, it's the best season thus far, for Dark Side of the Ring. Maybe it was just that break with that territory stuff that I just didn't find enjoyable. Um, with the Bash at the Beach, I mean, it was the subject matter. What's weird about it, I was going to tweet about it, but stopped myself a few times. It was the least tragic, of course, of any episode this season in terms of loss of life or permanent, damage on a person, but it was the least enjoyable, meaning that it didn't come across that there were too many characters that were likable. And not to offend any of your friends, John, I know a lot of the people in that were featured on the podcast, and of course we love Jeff Jarrett, but
Yes.
like they just didn't seem likable. Whereas like Bam Bam's family, Adrian Adonis's family, and so on, they were just like such good people that like it was good to like meet them in that sense. And that's sort of like what I have to say about Bam Bam's book as well. So yeah, so that's the story with Dark Side of the Ring. I'm not sure, was that the season finale or is there
No,
more
Marty
left?
Jannetty. Marty Jannetty next
Oh
week.
yes. I'm looking forward to that one. I'm a little bit scared, based on what he posts on Facebook sometimes, in terms of
Admitting
in
to
terms
murder.
of yeah, all the stuff that he's up to. But it's kind of sad, but it sounds like it'll be entertaining as well.
For sure. Now, as far as Pivot Share, what the heck is going on? They're closing up shop?
Yeah, so Pivot Share has sort of, it kind of felt like it went away, but it never really did. Some wrestling promotions were sort of using that as their, host website, whether some promotions it would be like .pivotshare.com or whatever, whereas others would be like, it would be sort of like modeled in their network, and Pivot Share was the background to it. Goodbye from Pivot Share. So I asked a content provider who I figured got this email to share it with me as the rumors were coming out. We at Pivot Share hope this email finds you well. It's with great sadness to inform you that we'll be closing down the Pivot Share service within the next 30 days. This was a difficult decision for all of us. It's been a pleasure working together. On July 31st, we will unsubscribe all users from all active subscriptions. So that's happened. Channels and all payroll videos will remain available through the end of August, after which channels will be decommissioned and unavailable to the public. We'll notify all active subscribers that August will be their final month of access. So I think Pivot Share is especially interesting because, in a way, when its parent company was in a much stronger position, it was almost like a sleeping giant for the industry. You had this brand, I mean, a very different brand, Chicken Soup for the Soul. I don't know if it's as popular in bookstores anymore, but if you went to like Barnes and Nobles or Borders years ago, there'd be like tables of like chicken soup for the sports fan, chicken soup for the elementary school teacher. There was like all these sort of books, but in terms of streaming, they own Crackle. In an interesting thing, they own Redbox, which they purchased. I think, from what I was reading, Redbox was sort of like attributed to their downfall because they were a small company, and then they bought Redbox, and then they had all these employees. So right before Chicken Soup for the Soul acquired Pivot Share, there was this initiative for Power Slam, Power Slam Pro Wrestling, it sort of felt like the next iteration from like Flow Slam, but that they already had these working relationships with companies that they were hosting. So they had 100 companies at the time in 15 countries, sort of like uniting independent wrestling, that there'd be one price to get in and have all this content. That seemed to fall apart quickly, but many pro wrestling companies stayed sort of like with their hosts, like Southern States Wrestling, NEW, ESW was there for a while. Catalyst, when it was called Capital Wrestling, had used them, but then they started migrating out. But just as an example for the strength of the company, um, the shares were up to, in around 2022, up to around 50, and now it's at 1.13. So, it makes sense that if they're not if the pivot share isn't a profitable model, or one that's sustainable right now, they have to cut costs because it's basically at its lowest price, or around its lowest price ever. So I had tweeted out, it would be a good idea for FITE, IWTV, and Premiere to start looking at some of these companies that might be still unattached, or freelancers. And CU Communications, our friends over there who work with Premiere, they immediately took the post and they reposted something or shared that we invite you to join Premiere Streaming Network, Be Premiere. I thought when they had that graphic, it meant like people to sign up, but I guess it also means that they're recruiting companies. Which, from what I understand, Adrian, our friend from MKW, is doing so with some of the Eastern companies. And I first learned about this, of course, from Bo James of Southern States Wrestling, a real old school promoter who has 32 years of content, and now will be migrating somewhere else.
Yeah, what is going on with Bo? What's he posting about lately? The king of
So,
Kingsport, if you will.
yes. So he had posted in the spring of 91, 16-year-old me talked the city of Kingsport into adding Southern States Wrestling to their annual Fun Fest. 32 years ago tonight, that event happened. It was an eye-opening educational experience for me. If you read my first book, Do You Want to Be a Wrestler, Kid? I go in depth about it. Find out what led to me threatening to kill a grown man and Ivan Koloff trying to kill the same man. Oh boy. Also, you learn about all the build up to this event in my book and how Ivan saved the day in more than one way. The event has been on Southern States Wrestling Network for a few years. Sadly, the network will be closing at the end of this month. Pivot Share is going out of business. Don't worry, soon, and very soon we'll be making an announcement where you'll be able to watch Southern States Wrestling on a bigger platform worldwide.
Interesting. Interesting. Changing gears, though, of course. Let's talk about Impact. What is going on with them? It seems like I don't know, they're picking up steam. Are they picking up momentum or what?
Yeah, in some ways, there's some good news to report that they've been doing it, I think, since 2006, being on YouTube, that is, and they recently passed 3 billion views. So, very impressive for them. So I did some dirty math, meaning that just googling what does a YouTuber get per view, and multiplied that by 3 billion. I'm not saying that this is a number that YouTube that Impact has ever gotten in its history, just sort of like as a base comparison point. So for each view, somebody that's part of the ad program, and of course all different sorts of deals are negotiated, preferred content providers depending what country it is, and all that sort of stuff. So this is not indicative. 0.018 per view. So um, a very small number, but when you multiply that by 3 billion, that's $54 million. Again, not saying that that's what Impact has made from this throughout the years, but divided by 17 years and so on, I think it's a pretty good source of revenue for whatever they're making. So they're still ahead of AEW by almost a million subs. So they have 4.68 million subscribers. AEW has 3.75. Obviously, AEW is catching up, right? They're only around 4 years. And again, Impact has this channel for about 17 years. But in looking at Social Blade, which compares social media accounts, they're both ranked as B pluses. The estimates for Impact Wrestling is between, and this is a pretty wide variance, 3.7 thousand a month and 56,000 a month, and for AEW it's 11,000 and 187,000. So obviously very hard to draw out from that. Impact got 14.9 million views according to them in the last month, and AEW has 46.7 million views. So AEW seems to have the momentum over there. Just to show that numbers can vary. So Social Blade had 2.2 billion views for Impact, whereas of course they just celebrated 3 billion, and Social Blade has 1.8 billion views for AEW. So take that for what it's worth. So that's the YouTube portion of Impact. But in terms of further positive momentum, Impact Wrestling recently was watched by 153,000 viewers in its first run, which was the show's highest viewership in 18 months. For a comparison point, New Japan had 62,000 viewers. More good news, Dave Meltzer reported that Slammiversary did 4,400 traditional television. I think compared to last year, that was about 1,800 or something around that. Okay. Now, in looking at some of their upcoming events, of course, Multiverse United is with New Japan, which we've talked about a few times on the show. There's still front row tickets available and plenty of tickets left, even in the 2300 arena, the old ECW arena. Similar story for a number of shows in terms of Emergence in Toronto, in White Plains, plenty of third row and beyond tickets left in a small reserve seat setup, but a general admission section as well. In Memphis, you could still get front row as well. Where it looked like they were doing well was in Bound for Glory. When they go to Chicago, it looked like a fair amount of the reserve seats were gone. I just want to take another look for next time, just to see what the map looks like next time. Sometimes certain things are on sale and not on sale. Finally, with Impact, what's always curious, like when you go to another country, is sort of like who's helping you on the ground. So I saw on LinkedIn a posting by someone named Simon Rothstein of SRX Consultants, which is a boutique PR firm. So they've worked with Impact for a number of years to help in that region, and they're involved in the UK tour. So it's the first tour here in almost 8 years, and we secured lots of brilliant British and international coverage. The team in the USA got a load there too, and it was impressive because he had fit in like all these links to the different media, like the full URLs. So I was just impressed by finding the space to do that in a LinkedIn posting.
Nice. Now, what's going on with the new Curacao promotion in the U.S.? What is going on? So there's going to be another Japanese promotion in the U.S., not New Japan Pro Wrestling?
Yeah, so this is the one that Mike Inside, Mike Johnson of PW Insider, I just like combined it. Obviously has an inside connection with somebody very knowledgeable of this startup, who's been sharing like sort of these cookies of information as we go. So as far as I understand, or what we know so far, these people that are starting it up were consultants with New Japan. And whatever they knew before, or whatever they've learned, well, they're opening up their own promotion that will be based in the US. There's plans to do a show in New York City in the fall. I mean, it's already August, so we're waiting for that. There's a number of legendary names that are attached to this already from All Japan Women. I think a lot of them sort of like as on screen or commentators and so on, as opposed to coming out of retirement. But it looks like a very expensive proposition. So PW Insider has learned more about the planned business model for the new promotion, which is expected to hold its first event in New York City this fall. We're hearing the brain trust behind the company has been really focused on building out its ecosystem of content. We are told there has been a big, huge focus on developing short and long form anime content related to the wrestling, a very unique strategy given a number of major streaming services, including Netflix, Amazon, Apple, and more, are spending billions of dollars on anime. Um, so, not only are they starting a promotion, they want to run it in New York. There hasn't been a big market for Joshi here. Besides being a pro wrestling company, it's going to be anime too. So, a lot of balls in the air. So, I reached out to our friend Kevin Kleinrock of Mass Republic, who actually works full time in anime and obviously knows the wrestling business. So just wanted to share a few tidbits that he had shared in an informal conversation. I didn't have um, you know, uh, a formal interview with him, and we didn't talk about this being like, you know, fully, like that. I was doing this for the podcast, but he had such good points that I just wanted to share some of them, sort of like in broad strokes. So one of the things that he shared was that different streamers have already altered their approach to anime. So, for a company like Netflix, they are looking at titles that they thought would be popular outside of Japan, but now they're shifting their focus to inside Japan. For a company like HBO Max, um, he feels that they're slowing down on taking anime content, but in Latin America, they're finding more. A way to approach this now, some content is finding ways to distribute it for free and making money off that content. So, for example, Tiger Mask has an anime show that's distributed widely through like Tubi and Pluto, and then I guess it's like a cut of the ad money. Um, so the biggest anime titles could get hundreds of thousands of dollars in episodes and rights fees. And similar to pro wrestling, right? There's a lot of anime companies that aren't making much of anything. But what gave me more confidence in this project was Kevin's confidence about the project and upon learning about it. He thinks that it's the right approach, that they're um, not just focusing on an in-ring product, but they're developing an ecosystem that involves pro wrestling. And he thinks that based on his connections, that he can imagine a couple of companies that do things like distribution and licensing being interested in it. That the genre is very strong right now, but there's a few that have broken out, probably similar to pro wrestling, right? You could say
Yeah.
uh, WWE for sure, AEW to a certain degree, and each of these other companies has its niche, which we talk about regularly, but very few have sort of like broken out.
What is Exodus Pro? What is that?
So it's sort of the I don't know, the baby or the cousin of Control Your Narrative, meaning that Exodus Pro, the new professional wrestling promotion from the mind of EC3, has signed a deal exclusively with Premier Streaming Network. They'll have an inaugural talent from Control Your Narrative, and both current and emerging stars in the wrestling business. Um, the concept of Exodus Pro is for up and coming talent to take the initiative and do what is necessary to compete at the highest level this industry has to offer. The true stars of tomorrow are the ones who invest in themselves and relentlessly pursue their passion. Exodus Pro is their journey to take and platform to create, and Premiere is the streaming service where fans can watch it all happen. Collaborating with EC3 to bring Exodus to Premiere is very exciting, said Josh Chernoff, COO of Premiere. EC3's unique perspective as an independent content creator aligns perfectly with the imaginative spirit that Premiere embraces. Together, we look forward to delivering a captivating viewing experience that resonates with audiences everywhere. So, when I first saw this, it sort of stood out to me like Premiere has to be careful. My theory is that Pro Wrestling TV, whom of course we interviewed the owner, and it's still around as far as I understand. Um, it got branded with control your narrative. It sort of became the control your narrative distribution platform. And while they had, Maria Kanellis' promotion and some Southern promotions and so on, it never really broke out from that. And when Control Your Narrative A lost talent and B had this like terrible branding, like branding reputation in the industry, it sort of made that streaming service very unappealing. So I think Premiere has branded itself well so far as they're continuing to emerge. But when you're getting involved with something that's connected to control your narrative, you just want to be careful of how that may resonate. To me, like from the outside looking in, like it might be more of a negative than a positive.
Interesting. But he's back though. EC3 Exodus Pro. Interesting.
Yeah, I obviously he's very passionate about what he likes in wrestling and his brand of wrestling. I don't think he's found sort of like a wide audience yet that sort of believes in the same thing, but he's working in a niche, so hopefully, he can find it.
What's going on with CW? Are they trying to be a bidder in wrestling? I mean, it's weird because they're like in NASCAR, kind of like in that kind of sports realm. They're trying to do different things like live golf. Like, is CW going to be a player with WWE?
Yeah, so I've been beating the drums for a while for like CW, as relates to SmackDown and so on. It's like that classic thing where you're like a struggling network, you bring in a pro wrestling brand, it raises your network's visibility, but you're not sure if it like raises the other content's visibility on your station. Is the advertising worth it, and so on. But it just seems like for a number of years that it would make sense for CW to have pro wrestling when it was more tied into the TNT, TBS type of brands. Um, my suggestion was that AEW would run like a second airing of Dynamite just on Friday nights. This is before Rampage and so on, because like they were already doing like a 0.0 or 0.1 for funniest animals or whatever. I was like, what do you have to lose? Now though, with the president or one of the executives, he was at Pop TV and he had Impact. Ultimately, Impact was let go from there, but I think he understands the value of pro wrestling and look like they're, besides like non-scripted programming, they have something called like F Boy. You could Google that, for what that all entails. But they have what else they have? They have one of their niches. This executive niches is like Canadian dramas and so on. It worked really well with Schitt's Creek. Excuse my language, but on Pop. Um, but they're also investing in sports. Look, like they got LIV Golf, and now LIV Golf will be or is like part of the PGA. So maybe it'll be like, depending on how long their contract is going to run, they might have gotten like a really good deal if it's just like an ad split. But what really intrigued me was that they're working with a smaller arm of NASCAR, right? I don't know if you would define it as the minor leagues, or I'm not sure how that works, but the Xfinity Series. And they're paying $115 million a year.
Wow.
not to wade too far into the WWE rights fees, like out of my comfort zone, but I think WWE was getting for 5 years $1 billion, right? With their
Yep.
different outlets. So of course they're looking for a raise, but like unless they're really serious bidders, right? It seems like Fox is not going hard after SmackDown. Um, maybe I think like I don't think they're ready to invest at that level in like a SmackDown. But what about like NXT for 2 hours? On Friday nights. Not Friday night. Sorry, of course. Whatever night fits that CW would do original programming. Um, that you could probably get for 150 million a year, maybe quite a bit less. So and you would get eyeballs there, especially if it's like this mix now, right? Like Rey Mysterio's floating through there, all these talents. So Brandon was writing a little bit about the CW too. So I don't know if there's any uh, fire to the smoke, or it's just a point for discussion, but it just seems sort of an obvious move for the CW right now.
As far as like CW though, are they legitimately like loaded or like where like who's like the parent of CW?
So CW's parent is one of the network owner. Sorry, like one of the owners of a number of affiliate stations. It's the ownership recently changed. So let me just look that up. So they are majority owned by 70% by Nexstar. So Nexstar owns a number of not only CW affiliates, but a broad array of affiliates around the country. So it was a smart move for them because they know how to make money through their affiliates. And instead of paying like a rights fee of sort of like, well, if we own, I don't know if they own the majority of CW affiliates, maybe, but if we own a fair amount and we buy the CW, we could sort of like be more aligned, in that way.
Interesting, because it's one of those things where it's like I wonder who is like the parent, because like if they're or the parent company, I mean, are they loaded? Are they not loaded? Can they afford WWE? Can they not afford WWE? Because I mean, NASCAR and then the Live Golf. I mean, they spent shit ton of money on it, so maybe they could be a player.
So with the NASCAR they did with LIV, from what I understand, it's one of those old wrestling deals. Like
Oh, like that's the best they can get. Yeah,
yeah, you
gotcha.
guys have to produce it and bring the talent, whatever. We'll put it on the air and we'll split the ad revenue. That's from, I'm not sure if anyone's ever like confirmed that, but that's from what I understand. But they might have stepped into like a big thing if their LIV has to be committed to this, and now it's like sort of part of PGA if that all goes through.
Ooh. Now, as far as like just changing gears here, what is the box office getting robbed? Who is that? What is that? And what does that have to do with anything?
Right, John. I'm sure in your like 1,000 plus interviews at this point, right? Like a lot of the talent that worked in the territories talks about that, like they're expecting to be big payday, and then the promoter comes down and is like, "I'm sorry, during the show somebody robbed the box office."
Right, right. And it's funny. I was just talking to Jumpin' Jim Brunzell. He was saying that Vince McMahon, who knows, we can believe Jumpin' Jim, but he was saying that he would say the box office said it was this amount of money, and then you'd find out later it was way more. So he's taking the percentage from that smaller number and not giving you the bigger number because he's taking a part of that. So interesting. Even the big leagues will steal from their own box office, quote unquote. Obviously, this is a different situation, though.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's happened before that somebody's actually robbed the box office, but I haven't heard about it in years. So uh, it's kind of funny, but obviously not for the people that experienced it.
Yep.
CMLL actually had their box office robbed. So this was from Cubs
Whoa.
fan. The big news from Arena Puebla happened outside the ring. Armed man robbed the ticket booth during the show. Puebla Cinco Radio has the security video of the crime. There are two Arena Pueblo staff in the small office. One man appeared to be processing tickets. He's writing down a ticket location and crossing it off the map. The other was standing with the door half open, waiting to take those tickets to someone. Instead, a masked robber came in, threw the waiting man down on one chair, pulled the ticket marker um, uh, out of his chair to the floor. That robber keeps the Puebla employees away while a second robber comes and grabs the money and other items. The incident lasts less than a minute. There's also an exterior video showing no security on the public side of the door. Additional reporting mentions private security was hired and just don't do their jobs. The two robbers easily rushed to the ticket room. There's so little fuss that multiple bystanders go up to the ticket window to purchase tickets and only realize what's going on when they look through the window. Those bystanders include a family. When the group's father figure sees what's happening, he starts to go towards the room to help. Whoa. A third burglar, this one wearing a backpack in front, blocks his path and appears to flash a weapon at the bystander, who wisely decides to back off. Local Pueblo reports say there were actually 4 robbers, so maybe the fourth was handling the not so present security. 160,000 pesos, about 9,500 US dollars, plus the personal effects of Arena Pueblo manager Benjamin Marr and ticket seller Enrique Rivera were stolen. The robbers have so far gone away with the crime. Fans inside the building had no idea anything was going on, and CML has not publicly addressed the situation.
Wow, that is freaking crazy as hell, and a huge promotion like that to boot. My God, scary stuff.
Yeah, my theory is that, and I just developed it. It seems how smooth they were able to do it. Those people probably worked there at some point.
Yeah, part of it. Yep, for sure. Now, what's going on with GC Dub? I know they got a couple shows coming up.
Yeah, so just like a brief look at some of their shows as we close out the summer, and of course they're doing a number of international shows that we talked about recently. In Australia, in the UK, and so on. But just looking at domestic for comparison points, so by the time you listen to the show, 8-4 in Detroit is standing room only. They only set up, I think, 5 or 6 rows of chairs this time, besides those on the stage. Last time there were more. I know there were issues with sight lines previously, so I don't know if that would help with having less chairs. But the other higher profile shows aren't doing that strongly thus far. As we often note, GCW can be a late ticket seller, but shows in LA, the 2 shows in Atlantic City, the homecoming shows, 3rd and 4th row are still available. And in Hoffman Estates, the all out weekend, I get confused,
All out,
is
yeah.
all out. The 3rd row is still available. So, Detroit really strong. Some question marks with some of the regular strong venues, but we'll have to see at the end of the day.
Now, as far as GC Dub, I know they're kind of headed in a I don't know. It seems like a good direction. Maybe I don't know because they do run a lot of shows and they're doing a lot of shows in a lot of different countries. But what about the NWA? They're coming up on their 75th anniversary show. Are they headed in the right direction? Are they selling well? I know the big main event is going to be Tyrus against EC3 for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship in a bull rope match.
In my opinion, only, I think Billy Corgan is lucky. He's a wealthy man. I don't think I don't think it's generating much money at all. Just could be, but not from what I gather. They had momentum pre-pandemic. Of course, the Corgan's right hand person had to leave under Me Too movement type of accusations or a related type of situation. And look, Tyrus and EC3, they've both been over to various degrees in their careers, but in a bull rope match, it's not something that I gather the general public wants to see right now. I didn't share the image myself, but I laughed at it when I saw it on Facebook. It was a number of no offense to our Southern friends or whatever. It was another of stereotypical country bumpkins and some people holding the stars and bars, and it said we can't wait for the NWA, and it just seemed very not my joke, but it seemed very indicative of pro wrestling's perception of the NWA right now. When you look at their 75th anniversary show, Corrosion Ballroom, and in the Chase, there's just very few rows set up, maybe some first and second row seats sold, but just very small maps set up. Doesn't seem like a lot of interest there. Not a lot of publicity yet. Corgan does seem to get when for the World is a Vampire Tour, which we'll talk about in a second. They mentioned that he's involved in wrestling and so on. They're doing a taping again at Skyway Studios in Nashville, which whatever the setup is, that usually works out well for them. Impact was taping there for a while too, especially I think during the pandemic. They haven't been back there in a while, but I think that's a smart venue. And then number of NWA related dates on the World is a Vampire Tour as they go through Alabama, Florida, and North Carolina. And happy to see that Colby Carino is back. I know he's been on their tapings and so on, but that he's getting some paydays out of this tour as well. It was, too bad that he was close to WWE and that didn't work out. So glad to see him back with the NWA. I think he and Morton, are real highlights of the junior division and the real strength of the promotion right now.
As far as NWA moving forward, I know obviously they've got these shows going on, and really towards the end of August. Do they have anything out there like as far as like past August? Like I haven't really seen much other than at the end of this month. Have they got a bunch of shows lined up or no?
Not that they've announced publicly. They tend to, and I was actually even a little bit not too surprised because when's the 75th anniversary show that they would have to, right? It would be like basically the same like extended long weekend. That's Nashville and St. Louis would be both announced, but like often they don't announce a lot like ahead of time. It's sort of like, okay, we have this weekend coming up. We're in this city and that city. The World's a Vampire Tour, of course, with concerts, you have to have a lot announced in advance, but they don't tend to announce their regular shows a lot in advance. So I wouldn't take too much into that. I'd imagine that they have ideas of wherever and whenever that they'll tape next, but the way that they promote shows, it's not like a long lead time that I've noticed.
What's up with WoW? I know you love talking about their ratings.
Yeah, so just checking in on their ratings. Thank you, Brandon at WrestleNomics. Subscribe on their Patreon. In July, they did 298,000 average on in syndication. On Vice late night, the first is probably on the West Coast. I forgot if they do a staggered feed, 3 a.m. I think because we used to talk about that for um, some of the other programming, but 41,000 and 28,000. June 358. So that was their high water mark thus far. 54,000 and 34,000 on Vice, which is like gravy. Their highest rating, as far as I could see thus far, was 418,000 on June 11th. So we know they're renewed for season 2. So I think a success thus far, a success that people don't often talk about too much.
Pretty good for WoW. I mean, not bad. What's going on with Triller?
So Triller is going public. Long talked about. I think at first they were thinking about it as a SPAC deal, SPAC, where it's sort of like a reverse merger, and then suddenly you're public. But if that was pursued, it didn't work out. But now they're going for the New York Stock Exchange. So they put out a prospectus, and it showed some information about FITE. Interestingly enough, this was about the time of the acquisition, so I didn't exactly understand if it included before they bought it or after they bought it, or a combination. It looked like the first 6 months or thereabout of 2021. So we often think about like FITE as being cash flow positive. For that 6 months that I could see, it was actually losing money. So that was interesting to see. So once it goes public, if they break it out to such a degree, hopefully we'll be able to see like how FITE is doing quarter to quarter. It's often talked about as like, even though Triller might have struggled with different things, that it was like the successful branch, and in many ways it is. And sometimes you have to spend money to eventually make money and all that sort of stuff. But from what was revealed, as far as I understood the financials, it was negative in terms of that 6 month period. One other thing that I noticed in that was that FITE TV is party to a class action over its use of consumer personal identifying information uh, from Facebook. So actually, when I read that, I'm not sure if they're the ones suing or being sued, but there's some sort of class action lawsuit involving
Hmm.
Facebook. I'll just repeat the language again for our legal minds who are the listeners. Our subsidiary, FITE TV, is party to a class action over its use of consumer personal identifying information from Facebook. So it appears that they're the ones suing, but something to look into further.
What's going on with CMLL and Rev Pro? Fantastica Mania.
So CMLL, they have the existing deal with New Japan for years. They used to work with Ring of Honor when that was under, of course, different ownership. We haven't heard about them doing much with the UK in a while, and Rev Pro is certainly one of the most active and seemingly successful promotions in the UK. So they just announced that you can expect to see involvement from CML talents at Rev Pro's events starting on Saturday, September 23rd, with two huge shows as live from Manchester's Love Factory. Rev Pro presents Fantastica Mania UK 2023. This history-making event will be presented alongside Manchester's Taco Town, the UK's biggest taco and tequila festival, which all ticket holders will get complimentary entry into and will be the perfect introduction to the world of Lucha Libre and CMLL to wrestling fans in the UK. So it was interesting when you go to the website to look that they have this tie-in with a taco and tequila festival, talking about the aforementioned Kevin Kleinrock. A fair amount of the Master Public shows, from what I gather, they're hired to be part of the entertainment at these tequila and taco festivals, or vice versa. Whereas, like, I guess different points of Mexican culture, where of course lucha libre is a big thing, and Kevin and I were joking that you have sometimes at these events tens of thousands of people. They're not there just for pro wrestling, so you can't announce it as like X thousands of people saw a lucha libre show. But wouldn't it
Right.
be nice if you could?
Right. Yeah. And hey, when you talk about like huge ticket sellers, Wembley Stadium, all in AEW. I mean, they're getting up there, right? I mean, 80,000 tickets, 77,000, whatever. I mean, it was a high number. They're getting to the tippy top here in wrestling history.
Yeah, and aforementioned Jeff Jarrett is really pumping it up out there in terms of the media. Paul White is out there. It's interesting that the ex WWE era, sort of like however you define it, Attitude Era or whatever, is sort of like leading the push of for attention as opposed to like an MJF, which it makes sense in terms of like you have your hardcores now, so like let's get people that they'll recognize if they see a brief segment on the news or on a clip or in on a website or whatever, if newspapers are still a thing. To pump up the sales. And I don't know what staging they're thinking about and so on, but I've shared this a few times. There was a boxing match that I think they ended up doing 94,000, but the Wembley, even though it's modified maybe from previously, it can be set up for boxing for 100,000 people or nearly 100,000. So for wrestling, depending on the setup, it could be as well. So there might be still a ways to go. To me, the stage that I would want to see is just like a sea of people. Like you don't need a tunnel. A ramp would be nice, but like don't kill any seats if you could keep getting people
Right.
in there. Now it's up to the mainstream and that sort of draw to get people's curiosity and attention who might not go to pro wrestling too often.
So as far as I know, we don't do too much WB stuff, but I wanted to mention this because it's great. They just had a new partnership and a new deal that is called Far Reaching Partnership with Slim Jim, set to be the biggest partnership in WWE history, and it's going to be multi-layered. So pretty pretty awesome. Obviously, really kind of set forth with the Macho Man Randy Savage and Slim Jim, and then obviously he took Slim Jim with him to WCW, and that became a big sponsorship for them for many shows and many pay-per-views. But now they're starting with the SummerSlam Battle Royal, which would be sponsored by Slim Jim, and then there's going to be much more partnerships going forward with them, including custom content creation and social media execution with superstars, sweepstakes, fan engagement, in store activations, and more. So just want to throw that out there. Very interesting that Slim Jim is back, baby. They're back and they're dominating the WWE.
Yeah, I was joking that like remember they did like a hologram Paul Bearer or whatever it is,
Yes.
and I
Yes.
I know there's like full concerts where like Michael Jackson, has performed as a hologram. So like if you could get like the Macho Man, I know whatever there might be some bad blood or like those sort of things with McMahon, but although they did allow right him to appear as a video game character, right? So
Yep.
so that has to be on better footing. But yeah, I mean, good for Nick Khan. I think if anything, like WWE was underutilized in terms of promotional efforts. So he's unlocking the value in this, and their ticket sales have been growing and ratings and everything like that, and Peacock subscriptions. So there's ways to grow things, but I think like to utilize the interest in the fan base that you really have is really important. And pro wrestling has always been looked at as less than, but they're finding ways to position it for the better. And for them, a great way to increase their content. Hopefully, to some degree, it trickles down to the wrestlers. It'd be nicer if it would put them in a better position, sort of in the past wrestlers and so on. But they're certainly not a charity, and they don't act like it. Although they do good things sometimes, but in terms of a pure business perspective, I think it's a smart way to continue unlocking value. Now, they're supposed to close with the UFC, and Vince McMahon, quietly they announced this during the earnings report that right there was a subpoena, and they came and collected some more information. I'm not sure how you define that, sort of from a legal perspective, but there's some sort of additional investigation or information gathering going on by the government.
Interesting. Nothing has come out of it, but interesting that happened for sure.
Yeah, I don't know if this would still be a concern, meaning Vince's advanced age, but I have one of these WWE history books. Like it's half pictures, half stories that by Basil DeVito, and there was Linda McMahon was sharing a story in there when Vince seemed like pretty good likelihood he would go to jail with the steroid thing. And Vince was sharing that he didn't think that he would survive jail. What people talk about, what happens in jail, people attacking each other and so on, that Vince wouldn't stand for it. And he would rather, sort of like, not in so many words, he would rather die than undergo such a situation. Now, that was when he was in his early 40s and so on. I think like somebody that if he were to go to jail and who knows, maybe this is just a major fine coming his way or whatever, even if he's guilty, that I don't know if he would have the same concerns. And I don't know what type of physical shape he's in now, right? He just had spinal surgery. So maybe it's been a bad joke, myself included, that everyone's like sharing the picture with him with the neck collar, right? Like whenever
Right.
the feds are on his case, he's not healthy.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And just interesting to kind of go back to Dark Side of the Ring for a second before we wrap it up here. I kept thinking to myself because they were saying, oh, in 2000, Hogan was done. Hogan was done. They kept saying Hogan was done. But it was weird. They never, the one thing was, and it has nothing to do with the creators of the show or the way they put it together, but Jeff Jarrett, Russo, nobody brought this back up that Hogan was done where we didn't want him to be champ, blah blah. The guy came back in 2002 at the WWF and was the headliner for WrestleMania for 2 years in a row, and literally like had one of the greatest matches of all time in WrestleMania history. So I was like, and I love Jeff and I like Russo obviously, but it's like, guys, you can't say the guy is done when there's actual evidence that he clearly, and Meltzer too could have brought this up. Clearly, he wasn't done. It was how he was booked. He was booked horribly at the end of WCW.
So my theory with Hogan and John, I defer to you, is like Hogan had two runs where he was like the headliner, right? Like you really want to see him
Yeah,
every week. So of course the Hogan years, everyone should go listen to that podcast. And then certain points in WCW in advance of 99, certainly 2000. But then he sort of transitions at other points to sort of being that attraction where it should be like almost like that Andre, or like what they always talk about, the Babe Ruth, where and they did this. Now they finally figured that out with, like, I know Lesnar's now more involved, but like with the Undertaker saying, where when you have talents and like they're on twice a week, or you're at least featuring them twice a week, like it burns people out. Whereas like you could come up with something creative and interesting and like peak them, they're there and they're gone. I've even experienced it myself where it's like Hogan comes back, it's like amazing, it's like Hulk Hogan is back, and then like 3 weeks later you're sort of like burned out on him because he's such like an intense personality and so on. And it's hard to absorb every week. Whereas like if you use him in the right way, obviously WrestleMania 19, right, being that like prime example.
yeah. And WCW, he was on every week. He's feuding with Billy Kidman. I mean, that was awful. He's having matches with like, which is fine, like Vampiro, Mike also, but they should have made it more special where he's wrestling maybe those guys once a month on a pay per view, not like every Nitro. He didn't need to be on every show. Like, just like for some reason that was never brought up even by Meltzer. It was like, well, you kind of have to book Hogan, right? I know he had creative control as far as like the finishes and stuff, but the booking of him at the end, like FUNB, remember he had the FUNB on his shirt, FU New Blood, like it was terrible. So obviously he goes back to WWE. He was NWO. He feuded with The Rock, and then he feuded with Vince. Had a pretty awesome run because they booked him right. And they knew, he's more of an attraction than let's have him on every week kind of guy.
Yeah, no, like Hogan done right? Like there's nobody bigger
Yeah.
in the
Yep.
world, but it's something that when like right to a different degree, right? People were even booing The Rock when he was overexposed and even like supposed to be a face, right? Like far after, not the original Die Rocky died, but like right in the early 2000s before they let his contract lapse, people were sort of tired of him. And like now you're like, oh my gosh, right? Like he came back for those
Yep.
mega matches, and we keep waiting for that Roman Reigns match where if it ever happens, kudos to Reigns and the Bloodline and Heyman and everyone booking this, like it'll be like bigger than we could have imagined. Whereas before it was sort of like, oh, if only The Rock would give Roman Reigns the rub, and now it's sort of like, can we find it? Not to this degree, but sort of like it feels like, oh, can we find it in Reigns' schedule, right? Like we have the twins, we have
Yes.
Solo and so on, that it's not as needed anymore.
Yes. True. But that's the genius of like booking some of these guys. Just make them more special rather than have them on every week for sure.
Yeah, that's what I always thought about with like pro wrestling. Like with boxing, like you want to pay that like $40 to $100 to see them once, right? Twice a year. Whereas like pro
Yeah.
wrestling, it's like John Cena, like here you go. We have to keep up the ratings. Let's just keep putting them out there.
Yep, true. All right, let's hit the plugs. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Two Man Power Trip. Check out the website, tmptempire.com. Lavie, what do you got?
Check out my long form articles on lioncubjobsearch.com. Follow me on Twitter, LAVIE and check out our LinkedIn group, The Business of the Business, the Pro Wrestling Industry.
All right, thank you, everybody, for listening. See you right back here next week for a little business of the business. We'll see you next week, folks.